Hi there, 4154. This is Dr. Ang. I just wanted to first and foremost tell you how proud I am that you are in your senior year and that you are doing awesome. And I just am so excited to be with you here today. Wanted to be there in person. We've got all these crazy guidelines and stipulations on us due to COVID right now. And if one class is going collaborate or virtual, then it's kind of pairing up 5-4 and 6-4, both doing that for the most part. So I wanted to send this video PowerPoint and then also extend a very open welcome to any questions or concerns that you have, obviously regarding legal that we're going to dive into today, but anything beyond that, if it's legal ethics, if it's pediatrics, if it's just nursing in general, or questions after you graduate, anything, personal, professional, whatever, I am here for you, and I would love to connect. So please reach out if I can do anything for you. We can set up a time. Obviously, email me anytime if you want to have a call, or we can set up a virtual office hour appointment to connect that way as well. But I do think of you often, and I just hope you guys are all doing great. And if you're not, or anything comes up, please reach out. So let's dive in to legal concepts. This is a passion of mine as a legal nurse consultant. You know that anything related to this, I would love to discuss with you. If you have any concerns, or any concerns even moving forward, like, wow, this is becoming real now. I am a senior. I'm looking at graduating and passing the NCLEX, and this time next year, I'm going to be a practicing nurse. So as that starts to sink in, the fruition of, wow, I'm going to be a registered nurse. And if I work this hard to get to that point, I want to do everything I can to protect that license. And that's what we're going to be here to discuss today. So readings, I'm going to go through and just kind of work through the PowerPoint. You pull it up, work along as I go. You should be able to stay on the slides. I'm not going to show the slides as I go, but I'm going to be going right down through the PowerPoint slides. So if you pull that up, you'll be able to stay with me here. So Guido book, you can pull that up and read that, but you should have everything you need to know after the lecture today. So if anything is of concerns or question needing clarity, send me a quick email and we will gladly work through that. References, Oklahoma Board of Nursing. We have kind of hit this all along, but now it's getting real. It's getting very real, and I want to make sure, obviously you know how to pull up the OBN website, but please do so. If we're in class, we normally would take time to do this. Want to make sure you go up, you tag this website. If you're going to be working and employed in the state of Oklahoma, you're going to want to tag that. If not, I also help you find, when we're in class, we will find whatever state that you plan to be registered in. You will find that, tag it, because that's very important. It's not just a meaningless exercise anymore that you think might be just an extra task or busy work. This is actually here to protect your license, so it's a lot more serious now. When you go onto the OBN website specifically, you'll look on the left-hand column, and there you'll find the Nurse Practice Acts. We'll see the rules and regulations that surround being a registered nurse in the state of Oklahoma. So the objectives today that we're going to hit and try to cover are reviewing the elements of a lawsuit. We've touched on this in previous semesters, but we're going to take a little bit deeper dive, and again reminding you and bringing that to the forefront because you're very, very close now to working and being employed as an actual registered nurse. So discuss the various legal roles of the nurse in litigation process. So what does this mean? Some of these terms you've heard before, but now we're going to make it nurse specific. So plaintiff, defense, witness, expert, and then the fact. So a fact witness, what does that, and what would your role be in that? And also for legality, we're not just here to, although this is a big point of this lecture today, we're not just here to point out what should you do or not do to avoid litigation, but we're also going to kind of highlight some of the roles as a nurse, because you may be a nurse manager one time and you're called in as a fact witness. That would not necessarily mean you're in trouble or you're under the magnifying glass, but you would serve in your role as a registered nurse as a fact witness. And that would more or less be saying, what would a reasonable or prudent nurse done in a similar situation? And then they're going to take that and line it up with the nurse that is under the magnifying glass for this litigation, and we're going to see if he or she functioned within that role, or if it was negligence, if it was viewed as negligence. So we're going to analyze legal implications of professional licensure, requirements of Nurse Practice Acts. We will be reviewing that, and then describe the role of OBN as the gatekeeper for patient safety. OBN holds nurses to a very, very high standard. It's very rigorous. It's also for schools of nursing as far as clinical hours, all the things that lead up to you becoming a nurse, and then they also take over as now you're a registered nurse. How many clinical hours, contact hours do you need to have in order to maintain? How often do you need to maintain? What happens if you do something wrong that's deemed negligent? Do they revoke your license? Do you lose your license completely, or do you just take some time off, do some remediation, and then you get it again? That is all housed in the Oklahoma Board of Nursing, similarly to whatever state that you will be practicing in. They are the gatekeeper of all of that information, and their ultimate goal of all of this is patient safety. We're going to identify methods to protect your nursing practice, discuss what due process is, and then discuss disciplinary process and disciplinary defense. So, legal concepts and the judicial process. Before we can dive into this lecture, we must first determine the definition of law. It's important to note that the definition is not as important as the law of society itself. Laws are made by people in a legislative body and reflect our ever-changing needs. So what we learn today may not be applicable in a year from now. And as I record this lecture today, we are looking at a very, very big presidential election 2 days from now. So specifically now, what we learn and what we know today may not be the case a year from now. Things shift, and there's a lot of moving parts with this. So that's why I try to encourage you to not only know where the Oklahoma Board of Nursing website is, but where our Nurse Practice Acts are. And these things can constantly change and amendments be made. And it's important for us as a nurse to take responsibility that we are up to date on those changes. A law is basically just a set of rules or principles. And there's the legal process, and we're specifically going to dive into that and peel back that onion, how it relates to nursing and the nursing practice. So who was the first registered nurse? Usually give some time in class. We kind of discuss this. The key word here is, who was the first registered nurse? Normally when I ask this question, the first thought that comes to mind is Florence Nightingale, and she was the first nurse. The important part about our profession and how we have came to be a very reputable and respected profession is that we now have the word registered before our profession of a nurse. So Florence Nightingale was the first nurse, and she believed in caring and bedside and the meeting of needs of patients. But it wasn't until Ellen Doherty in 1902, she's from New Zealand, and this was the first state of registry for nurses. The term registered came from Nurse Registration Act, and we had nurses, and then we had registered nurses at this point. The word registered is quite an accomplishment because it indicates that the nurse has met a specific level of criteria and that they demonstrate a certain level of competency. So anyone can care for someone, and anyone can meet basic needs, but when it comes to a registered nurse, we now know that there's a certain level of criteria and competency that comes with that. And we also know there's different levels of nurses, and the majority of the general public know that we want to know that it's a registered nurse, and not discounting anyone else. This is similar. I don't want to take any jabs at any professions either, but I can say that I am a trainer and I can help you meet your fitness goals, and I just show up and tell you what I think. Or you can be someone that holds an actual college education surrounding this. You have certain certifications, and all of a sudden that brings a different level of clout when it comes to your level of expertise. So know this slide. So in 1902, it was New Zealand where they first stumbled upon that, hey, maybe we should put some criteria of who calls themselves a nurse. And our first registered nurse was Ellen Doherty. So also when we're in class, we break out into groups of 2 or 3, and we just kind of discuss what would the ramifications be of having a society with no laws? What if we had no governing body just in society in general? What would that look like? What would it be? Generally, we think of mass chaos. Comparing this to nursing with no laws or no level of competency or no level of regulations that guide or govern the body of professional nurses, anyone can call themselves a nurse. And we wanted to kind of clean that up. And that's when it came into fruition that we need to set these certain guidelines. So we're not going to take time to do this today, since the majority of you will be viewing this video independently, but it is kind of an interesting exercise to do when you just imagine what life is. And there are several countries that this is the case, where there are not governing bodies and there's not laws. So yes, you're free to do whatever you want, but then so is everyone else. And when everyone is going by their own set of what's right and what's wrong, it creates a hysteria and a sense of chaos. And so to avoid that, there's certain guidelines that are in place, and that's why we have registered nurses. There are different types of laws: statutory, administrative, constitutional, and then judicial law. Know the difference between each of these. Understanding the various sources of law will help us in understanding their impact on the nursing profession. So we want to kind of determine what these laws are. Each branch of government has the right and the authority to create laws and enforce them. These laws work together to form the basis of our judicial system. So we're going to break that down as we move here. Okay, this is taken directly from your Guido book. You can look and see. So constitutional law is the Bill of Rights, would be an example of constitutional. Amendments to the Constitution all fall under constitutional law. Excuse me. Then you see the statutory law. So this is both civil and criminal law. Can fall under here. Torts, we talk a lot about that. Torts, anything will land you in court. So tort law is a statutory law. And administrative law, this is more boards of nursing. So administrative, and just a lot of this is common sense, so don't let this get confusing. If you see this on an exam, just sit back, take a deep breath, and see, okay, process this through. This kind of makes sense. So if you need administration of some sort, would be a board of nursing. Regulatory boards would fall under administrative law. And if you notice, I'm saying the ones that are a little bit more directly impacted to nursing, so just follow those. You don't need to know the whole list. And then judicial law, courts of law. This can go all the way up to the Supreme Court level. So judicial law would be in the courts. Boards of nursing is administrative law. A tort, anything a land of nursing court, is found under statutory law. And then constitutional law is specifically related to the Bill of Rights. I'm moving through this somewhat quickly, knowing that there's a lot of nice to know information in here. But I'll take a deep dive on the stuff that you need to, and I'll try to emphasize that what you'll need to know for the exam, as well as what's more pertinent for your information. 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Congress is underneath legislative, so that's the Senate, and then the House of Representatives falls underneath legislative law. Executive law falls underneath President and Vice President, and then all of the cabinet would be under there. So President, Vice President is executive law. And then judicial, again, we mentioned, is the Supreme Court. So when we have the 3 branches of government and we think of the Constitution, okay, then think of legislative, and that is Congress, Senate, and the House of Representatives. Executive, President, Vice President, and then the judicial, which is the Supreme Court. Bill of Rights limits federal government, prevails over state and local law. I have some links on here as well. Those are interesting too if you want to, if this is of interest to you, you can take this obviously a lot deeper. Statutory laws, so we're going to kind of pull in a spot and park right here, and we're going to peel this back a little bit. Statutory laws are made by legislation. Congress, state legislative bodies, and city councils even can come into play here. This is more like codes, collections of statutes, city ordinances. Nursing license laws, statutes of limitations, protective and reporting laws, etc., fall underneath statutory laws. So specific laws that relate to nursing are going to fall under statutory laws. I'm going to say that one more time so that we're very clear on that. Laws that are specific to nursing are going to fall under statutory laws. So governing nursing are statutory laws. Nurse Practice Acts are statutory laws. So Nurse Practice Acts are statutory laws. As we're learning about the laws, as nurses need to be most familiar with the statutory laws. And they're made by our legislatures, and then they fall into administrative bodies that enforce that, such as the Oklahoma Board of Nursing. Administrative laws. Administrative agencies composed of persons with qualifications or experience implement particular legislation and create and enforce rules and regulations. So here it's composed of persons with qualifications and experience. So we obviously, for the Oklahoma Board of Nursing, we're going to elect people to that board that are qualified nursing professionals. We will not pull people from other professions necessarily, unless it's a collaborative. We're trying to build and we're working in it collaboratively. But when it comes to maintaining guidelines for nurses, we want nurses speaking into that have walked on the front lines and then now are sitting in those positions that can be a voice for the professional nurse, and that can speak into that. So statutory law, we keep referring to nursing licensure laws. An example of a statutory law in nursing license laws, which regulate healthcare providers with individual states. Nursing license laws are designed to protect the general public from incompetent healthcare providers. Known generally as Nurse Practice Acts or Nurse Practice Acts depending on the state, these statutory laws give authority to qualified licensed practitioners to practice nursing in a given state. Okay, so statutory laws are going to determine who is qualified to be a registered nurse, who is qualified to be, so this is where we come up, how many hours should it take to be an associate degree prepared nurse? How many hours should it take to be a bachelor prepared? Master's, and then doctoral. Is it, what does it look like to have a PhD in nursing compared to being a DNP? Master's, nurse practitioner, all these things, just the guidelines that are overset fall underneath a statutory law. What happens if you get out, you graduate, you have a family, you have an illness, whatever the case may be, you sit out of nursing for a while. Say you sit out 3 years. What does that look like? Do I just apply for a job, I get that, and I hop right back in as a nurse? Or do now I have to take some continuing education because I had a pause for 3 years? Who determines that? Those laws, knowing that we have the general public out here wanting and deserving to be protected, we're not going to just throw people at the bedside that aren't held to a very, very rigorous set of guidelines and laws. So those are statutory laws that determine, so we know and the general public know that if I have a registered nurse at my bedside, I can put my total trust in that individual. Judicial laws are made by courts, and judicial laws are a bit more in depth than we need to cover at this point. It's going to take, this is going to be more when if we have a case that climbs up to it was more malicious, or it was a premeditated incident that happens with a nurse, or there are multiple occurrences that lead to something that was premeditated. It would climb up more into a judicial law, but normally the statutory laws can kind of handle that, and it's generally handled at the state level with the Oklahoma Board of Nursing. All laws are subject to change. This is true with anything, and specifically with nursing. And I tell new grads, as you're coming in your senior year, when you go for an interview and they ask you at the end, once you've been drilled for a period of time, then they'll look at you generally and they'll say, do you have any questions for me? Or for us, or for our institution? And what I encourage you to say is when there are changes or there are amendments made for us as a registered nurse, or within your institution, or there are different policies that are changed, how do you make us aware of that? Knowing that it's my full responsibility as the registered nurse, but you do want to know that you're employed by someone that follows this very carefully and is very in tune to following the guidelines. If you get a lax institution, place to work, that's not going to be a place you're probably going to want to work long term, because that can also lead into, if an accident does occur, you might find yourself on an island by yourself. So make sure that you ask about these things, we'll get into this later, but about coverage and what happens if there's something. Is it all up to you, or are you underneath their overarching umbrella for legality? And are you protected as long as you're functioning and practicing within the guidelines set by that institution? So there's lots of questions that when they give you that opportunity, you definitely want to ask, so you can get a feel for that. Same way as it may be argued that TU is a more difficult or more rigorous program than others. And again, I like to say to students when they go through, you can definitely find an easier program. But there are other things to look at with that, the rigor as you go. And when you go through the program, when Oklahoma Board of Nursing may even say, for example, just a rough number, you need to have 100 clinical hours. TU generally will say, well, let's have 125. We want to be thorough, meet the mark, and then some. We don't want to be functioning below the bar at any point. So when you're applying for a position, make sure that you are with an organization or an institution that you feel is checking all the boxes, because you don't want to find yourself on an island, and that could be an indication. If there ever was legality, you want to know that they are there for you, and they're going to be proactive, and they haven't been cutting corners. So just a little side note for you to be conscious of. So Constitution may be amended, statutes may be amended, repealed, or expanded. Administrative bodies may be dissolved, expanded, or redefined, and then judicial law will be affected by new court decisions. So again, we have another new justice that's just been named, depending on who holds which party is holding the House. Different things will come into play. So the point of this is everything is constantly changing. So just stay in tune with those changes and how they will directly relate to you as a registered nurse in the state in which you practice. Common law versus civil law. Common law is derived from principles based on justice, reason, and common sense, whereas civil law is concerned with the rights and duties of private citizens, administrative between private people or private groups, enforced through courts as damages. No fine or imprisonment is assessed. So this is the difference. We've mentioned civil law. They're the rights and duties of private citizens, civilian persons, person against person generally. Common law is also very similar to civil law, but it is not set in stone. So common law is a little more fluid. Common law is not typically written out or defined as clearly as actual civil law. That's more court enforced. So there's a little fluid with common. That's a little confusing, and I acknowledge that. You should not see that aspect. So don't spend too much time on that. I'll give you another slide here. The difference, though, I do want you to know the difference between civil law and criminal law. Civil law is, let me give you an example. So again, tort, what's going to land you in court here. I was working night shift as a nurse, and I had 8 patients, and I normally should have only had 4. I had a patient that was coding out in the hall while I was trying to change a dressing on a patient in a room. I heard the screams in the hall. I got my patient settled, and I turned to help with the code and to start CPR. In the meantime, my patient that I was changing their dressing, he rolled out of bed and fractured his hip. And now I'm being sued for the fall and the injury that happened to my patient. So this is an example of where I technically, this could be argued in court that I was within my guidelines. When they tried to prove this was nursing negligence, I can come up with a fact witness, different things can come and probably prove that I had a pretty good reason for why I left the bedside of that patient. So there's some room to defend that action. However, with criminal law, this is going to be a case where I'm working on night shift, and once I saw there was no one around, and I was pulling up my pain meds for several patients, and instead of going around and administering those medications, those pain meds, I stuck them in my pocket and later put them in my backpack to leave at the end of the shift. There's the difference between criminal versus civil. And in a tort, I could also be deemed guilty. So it's not saying that you're not, but there's just the reasonable doubt of, we don't know for sure if that was intentional or premeditated. Whereas criminal, it's usually very, very clear. Okay, public law, criminal law, substantive law, and procedural law. Don't spend a ton of time on this. I don't want to muddy the waters with too many terms. So just, you can be familiar, read through this, but don't take a deep dive on this one. And again, criminal versus civil law. This is the two that I need you to know the difference of, because as a nurse, accidents will happen, unfortunately. We're human. We are working in generally a very fast pace. There are things that might get forgotten. There may be accidents that happen. And there will be a lot of instances that happen that fall within civil wrong. Yeah, it was wrong. I didn't put the bed rail up and my patient fell out. That is absolutely wrong, and I acknowledge that. But let me give you the context of this situation. That is a civil duty, civil wrong, civil law. Criminal is intentional. Okay, you stole that, and that was in your backpack that later ended up in your car, or you physically harmed someone. These are things that are intentional. Nursing negligence can be either or both. Nursing negligence is just a term then that's going to be applied to something that you did that another reasonable, prudent nurse in the same situation would not have done. So you can prove that either way. Here's a YouTube video that kind of dives into it a little bit more and can help you with that. The next slide shows an example too, the difference of this. This is not a nursing example. I just gave you a nursing example, but this is just a visual. You get into a fender bender, a car runs into you on the street, you run into someone, that would be more of a civil law. Now we got to figure out who was at fault here. However, if someone breaks into your home, robs a bank, that is obviously criminal. That's intentional, premeditated, would fall under criminal law. The reason that I tell you this, and the reason you need to make the distinction of this, is because criminal law is setting you up for losing your nursing license. Okay, so you work this hard to get your nursing license, and then you go and do something very stupid, you do something very dumb, and you lose your license and your ability to work as a professional nurse. So that would be a long-term effect for you, affecting how you provide for your family, everything, all your hopes and dreams that you had based off of a criminal offense. Civil is, I know I'm entering into a very high pace. There's can be argued high stress in some situations, and I'm going to do the very, very best I can, but I know that I'm human and accidents might come into play. And if I get into a civil suit, the punishment is generally going to be less. And it may be, here you need to do some remediation. Has this happened before? Is this a first time offense? And then the consequences will be much different to that. But this is, the reason we're going over this so heavily is this is how it will affect your nursing license based off of whether you fall into civil or criminal offense. Nursing negligence equals a civil tort. There's a duty to perform. A patient comes into the hospital, they're assigned to you, you have that duty to perform. If you fail to do so for whatever the reason, that can be filed as nursing negligence. If it's compared again, mirrored up. What would a reasonable or prudent nurse done in the same situation? Did you fall within that? Then you're safe. If you did not, then that's when the reason for concern. And a civil tort is landing you in court in that situation. Examples of nursing violating criminal law. Go ahead and look in this, and I mean, you can Google this and just be fascinated, but one thing I want to caution you is it's very easy to sit maybe in your shoes now and think, oh, I can't believe anyone would do this. I can't believe anyone would falsify documentation, or why would they document vital signs that they didn't take? I can't believe someone would do that. Until you get in their shoes, until you get highly stressed, or people justify things that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. That's why it's so important to stay sharp. And I've talked in other lectures about what is the level of integrity that you stand by. For me, integrity is very, very important to me. So I'm going to do the same in my mind, and I'm not free without fault either. So, but I'm knowing in your mind that even if no one was looking, if you don't think you would get caught, would you do the same thing regardless? And just that character and that integrity, that even if it's hard, even if I'm overworked, even if I don't have any, I'm having a bad day, my home life is falling apart, I don't feel like I'm getting paid enough, I didn't get the vacation day that I asked for, whatever the case may be, I'm going to bring my A game, and I'm not going to compromise under any circumstance when it comes to the type of delivery of nursing care that I will provide for not just some of my patients, but all of my patients, regardless of the situation. And it's very important that you keep those very, very clear lenses on when you come to your shift. Otherwise, it's so easy to just start to slow fade off, and next thing you know, you're doing things you never thought that you would. So I just bring that to your attention and keep that on the forefront, because it can get very, very sticky out there sometimes, and when you are overworked, it's easy to cut corners, and I want to challenge you to not fall victim to that. We also have some case studies. These usually take up quite a bit of our class time. It's again just giving you some examples of what some of the examples I've mentioned to you, but just different ways that nurses, you don't set out to be a bad nurse. I don't know of anybody that would set out to be a bad nurse. You work too hard for this license. But just be aware of the cases that happen. Obviously, we know you would not steal medications. You wouldn't steal from somebody. You wouldn't physically harm someone. But would you spread rumors? Would you go on to someone else's record and look up information about your neighbor that you're not caring for? Just different things that, you know, if it was night shift and no one was around, would you do the same thing as you would? As you're in nursing school and you have a nursing faculty hovering over your shoulder. Just staying to that level of sharpness is so critical if you want to stay out of legality. So, elements of a tort. Duty, breach, injury, and causation. So duty, there's a duty to perform. If a patient comes in and they're assigned to you, you now have a duty to perform for that patient. Breach, a failure to show proper care to that patient, whatever the case may be. I got this patient, they were admitted to my floor. I knew they were at high risk for pressure ulcers. I was supposed to turn this patient every 2 hours. I did not. I knew that was something. They were in my care. I delegated it off to someone. They were busy. They didn't do it either. I didn't follow up. There was a breach in the care that should have been received by that patient that trusted me. We are the trusted profession. They trusted me, and I failed to perform that and to show proper care. Then there was an injury. Now they have a pressure ulcer. They had maybe coming in a 1, and within a week they have a level 4. I cared for them 3 days, and I did not provide the care that I should have. And then causation. Me failing to turn this patient, yes, was a direct causation to an injury in a pressure ulcer that now when they are diabetic and they are bedridden and they are not able to get up and ambulate, this is a big problem for this patient, and it's because of my lack of failure to show proper care to this patient that they now have a worse diagnosis than when they came into my care. So all of these items would qualify elements of a tort. They're going to land me in court, and the outcome of this is not going to be good because of my choice to failure to show proper care to this patient. The 4 elements of malpractice in nursing: standard of care, minimum expected of staff, policies and procedures, mandatory documents and services. If you work for one of the powerhouse institutions, hospitals in the area, you're going to know all the things. They're going to hammer you with in-services on not leaving Foley catheters in, turning your patients, all these things, leaving the bed rails up, fall precautions, because they are hammered with litigation underneath. Risk management will highlight these areas, and then it's going to spit out and result into in-services to help avoid this in the future. These things that are the biggies for malpractice. It's usually concerning medications, falls, bed sores, pressure ulcers, whatever the current term is. That's generally what is going to be surrounding the litigations for nursing. So obviously, if there's a case presented against you as a nurse, that also is bringing in the institution. So they want to avoid their name along with you. So that's why in-services will be in place. Again, excuse me, 4 elements of malpractice, same way as negligence, all the components of a tort: duty, breach of duty, there's got to be a damage there, and then direct causation. So if I have a patient and someone came in and said, yeah, there was a bed rail that was not put up, I don't know what happened, and then the patient leaves their discharge and they roll out of bed at home, obviously no, that has nothing to do with the fact that I didn't put the bed rail up in the hospital when they were under my care. So individuals do get a little crazy of trying to point blame and to try to name lawsuits in order to name institutions and nurses and medical professionals in pursuit of getting monetary gain, but that does not mean that you're directly going to be in a litigation. It will probably get thrown out before it reaches full court and before you are pulled in for that, because although there may be something that you did that you could have done better, there's not a direct correlation or causation to the damages that individual experienced. Malpractice and negligence are kind of used interchangeably, so don't let that get you confused. Breach of duty, we've went through that. Most common malpractice claims against nurses or nursing negligence, failure to follow standards of care. That's the critical one. If you see that on the NCLEX, that's the answer. Failure to follow standard of care. Failure to communicate, failure to document, failure to assess and monitor. If you know that a patient's vital signs are slowly declining, you reach out to the doctor or to whoever the healthcare professional is, prescriber. They prescribe something. You can even implement that intervention, but if you don't follow up and evaluate and assess and monitor and they further decline, that is going to not only be, it's not going to be on the provider that prescribed that intervention that didn't work. It's going to be a big arrow above the nurse's head because there was a failure to assess and monitor. I knew something was wrong. I went the steps to get an intervention. However, I walked away and did nothing as far as assessing and monitoring the effectiveness or evaluating that. Is there further intervention that needs to be done? Or can I document that that was successful and I will continue to monitor? Either way, you continue to monitor and assess that individual. We've heard about this all along, but it's critical. If you don't document, it wasn't done. I can assess, I can turn my patient, I can do all of these things, and if I don't document it, you're going to be in court the same way as if you didn't do it altogether, because they're going to go on to that documentation, and that is part of functioning in the profession under standards of care. Again, if we were in class, we would do our breakout sessions, summarizing case studies and seeing what was done incorrectly, what could have been done wrong. And I encourage you to just take one, even by yourself. Just find one case of nursing negligence and pull something from that on this slide right here, slide 29, and see what you can gain from that, glean something from that, and just take a little bit of time to think, like, what is my personal code of ethics that's going to carry through to my professional code of ethics, and then following within the guidelines of being a professional nurse. But a lot of this in other classes that I've done, we kind of go through that. It's good to have a personal code of ethics that you know that you're going to see your profession through those, and hopefully they will align. But if I'm honest and dependable, that should carry through into my profession. Regardless of the guidelines that are set in my professional code of ethics, certain ones of my personal code of ethics should always reign through. So I encourage you to take a few minutes to do that. Anatomy of a lawsuit and the litigation process. Just to kind of run through, preparing a case, retrieval and review of the records. This is how the litigation process kind of unfolds. Pre-litigation reviews by a state or agency or a panel. Complaint with claims and petition for alleged damages is filed. Then the defendant is notified. So in the case of a nurse, if now all the facts are there, so they're going to reach out and you're going to be notified. Then hopefully you're going to get an attorney, or one will be assigned to you, and I recommend you getting your own. Even if the institution you work for says, oh, we have an attorney, you'll be covered here, don't worry about it, please get your own attorney, your own coverage. Answer to complaint is filed. Defenses are alleged and may contain counterclaims. So this is, in a nutshell, the litigation process. So either plaintiff, witness, or defense. A witness, facts. So a fact witness, you're charting knowledge of the policies or procedures, current standards of practice, and rationale for your behaviors and decisions. So a fact witness is going to be able to just give information, just that. I can give the facts on, so this is the details surrounding, I saw what happened, this is what I saw, this is what I can bring, and I have proof and evidence of this information. Expert witness represents standard of practice at the time of the occurrence. This would be more thinking of maybe a charge nurse. I am familiar with this unit. Yes, we were. We had 2 people call in. We were doing the very best we could. We had someone else get sick and go home. Yes, he or she was a new nurse and should have been still with a preceptor. We had to pull them off. We were doing the very best we can in that moment, but yes, we were very understaffed. This is what goes on. This is what's acceptable procedures on our unit. They're going to give the expert witness. I am also a nurse. I am also working on that unit. I am very familiar of that, and that would be an expert witness. Whereas a fact witness would, I don't necessarily work on that unit, and I don't know that situation, but I do know the basic facts surrounding this case. So plaintiff files a claim. They name the defendants. This could be the nurse. This could be the doctor, the pharmacist, the institution, however many they need to. Description of damage, actual. So actual damage would be like a broken leg, okay? Special description of damage would be, this is even more so important than just the broken leg, because they are a construction worker that's always on their feet and they cannot make a living. They cannot remain employed now that they have this leg injury. Whereas, not that it's any different, not that you deserve a broken leg or can handle it any different, but if you have a desk job, that's a little bit different. So they're going to bring in that special angle. Anything that happens now, this is why this is specifically critical, because of X, Y, and Z. This patient does this for a living. This person lives in this particular location, whatever the case may be, that are special to that. Punitive, have done this before and didn't get a change in behavior. If you have a nurse that has taken medications or failed to administer medications, not once, but not twice, but even 3 times, now it's a problem with the institution too. That individual should have been let go from that position. Now they're hurting additional people because proper steps weren't taken in that case. So punitive, again, as a new nurse, as a seasoned nurse, you're going to make mistakes, and that is okay. It's best to be upfront. This is what happened. Learn from it. Take whatever steps you need to remediate that, and then learn from that lesson, so hopefully that won't happen again. But don't try to think, I accidentally did this. I don't want to tell anybody because they might not think I'm competent. You don't want things to be found by you shoving them under the rug, and they almost always will come to fruition, to come to light, and you don't want it to be that you weren't honest and sincere about that. So it's always better to tell the truth. Students also, as they're coming around to their nursing license, they'll ask me, I had this happen when I was 18 years old. Clearly, I have learned from that, and I'm not there anymore. They're asking me about this when I'm filing for my nursing license, and I don't know why I would need to tell them this, because it doesn't affect me today. And my advice to you is, tell them now. Don't let them find it later. It's going to be 10 times harder for you if you brush it under the rug, and then they come back with you that, and then it appears that you were hiding something. Honesty is always your best policy when it comes to legality. You do not want to in any way be hiding something. The results will be 10 times worse. Okay, there's a sample here. Anatomy of a lawsuit again. This is kind of a complex process, and I'm going to hit the parts that apply directly to you as a nurse. And if you want to dive deeper with that, you can. And if you want to come and talk to me, I would be glad to, because I love this stuff. But specifically for you right now, focus on the nursing aspect and see this through the nursing lenses. So the 6 procedural steps to any given lawsuit: initiation of the lawsuit, the pleadings, pretrial motions, discovery of evidence, trial process, appeals, and execution of judgment. Okay, step 1, the initiation of the lawsuit. This is when the plaintiff initiates the lawsuit. That's when they first come. They say, hey, something wasn't right. I want to pursue action on this. They must respond or they will lose automatically, the defendant. So if someone comes to you and you realize that a plaintiff has initiated a lawsuit, you're named as a defendant, and you don't respond, you automatically are admitting guilt to that. So you want to definitely do your part, go get where you have an attorney representing you as well, and then respond to that initial lawsuit. The earlier the better as well. Defendant receives summons. Pre-litigation panels. This is an important part. Not everyone that wants to sue someone can bring their case to court. This is important. I want you to pay attention to this. Pre-litigation panels are there to filter through. The case I was mentioning before, you fall out of bed at home, so don't blame me for leaving the rail down in the hospital. That sounds far-fetched, but actually it's not. There are a lot of crazy things. I bring a new mom and her baby, and they get in their car, the car seat, everything's checked off. Dad is there, they drive away. 2 days later, she's getting in the car and slips and falls, and then says something that I didn't do something when I was putting her in the car. There are bizarre cases out there that are going to try to link, and the pre-litigation panel is going to say, no, that is not directly related to that, and we're not even going to hear that or waste anyone's time, and they'll immediately throw it out. That's a pre-litigation panel. Step 2, pleadings and pretrial motions. Pleadings, statements of facts are perceived by opposing sides. They can dismiss or they can send it through. Amended pleadings correct or add new material. Motions, formal requests asked by the court or different parties. Lots of pieces to this. Don't worry about memorizing all of this again, please. Pretrial discovery of evidence phase. During the discovery, both sides determine strategies to obtain evidence, right of discovery. And this is where witnesses are questioned by opposing sides, and then they request information. And pretrial conference, this is when you kind of get your heads together and you're trying to pull as much information as you can to support your argument. The trial is actually on step 4, so now it's actually went through. Both sides select a jury. Opening statements are made. Witnesses are questioned and cross-examined. Evidence is presented. Standard of proof must be met. And let's see, beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest level of evidence. So beyond a reasonable doubt for there to be an accusation made, an actual, for them to win a case in this situation. Appeals is step 5. And then execution of judgment. Lawsuits involve nurse defendants results in the awarding of money, damages, in injunction to perform or restrain a certain action. Restraining order, dismissal of cause or action against the nurse. This is where they're deciding what's going to take place. Imprisoned or injunction. That's the different levels. And then default judgment or money damages awarded. They may be garnished or property confiscated to pay the award. So if you say, oh, you can come after me, but I don't have the money, they will garnish your wages for whatever job you do. If you lose the ability, the privilege to be employed as a registered nurse, they will take your garnish your wages from whatever job that you do or any money that you have, or take possessions that belong to you. So again, if we were in class, we would break out and we would rejoin the case study and then go through, discuss the 6 steps of a lawsuit and how they would pertain to your case. You do not need to do that. You can click on this next side, the role of quality organizations for Oklahoma Board of Nursing. You can look on the links there. And taking a proactive approach. This is very critical. What I've mentioned before. Perform only those skills within your practice scope. So if someone comes and they're doing a procedure and then they say, here, can you suture this up, or can you cut this, or whatever, during an in-depth procedure, you would say, no, I cannot. I'm sorry, I cannot. It's not, you're protecting your license, and it's okay if, as a new grad, you come out and someone asks you to do a skill that technically might be in your scope, but you can say, I'm sorry, I don't feel competent doing that skill at this point. Can I watch someone else? Okay, so competent, it'll take a while to feel confident, but competence, I need to see this skill done and I need to be checked off on this. And if I come right off of orientation and they're expecting me to do something that I have not been through the proper training to do, you need to speak up for yourself and say, that's not within my current scope of where I'm at. So as a new grad, or I'm still supposed to be with a preceptor, I'm not going to do that, because that could land you in court. Stay current in your field or specialty area by attending in-service programs. This is similar to, so I'm a nursing educator now. I'm a peds nurse. I want to stay up with that training. I want to stay up with legal ethics. What can I do for in-services? What can I do to maintain certifications in the different areas that is your expertise area? Because you want to remain sharp. If you're at the bedside, you want to know not only the current way to do the skills and what's for the best interests and the ultimate outcomes, optimal outcomes for that patient, you also want to know what are resources out there for these patients. If I handle oncology patients or cystic fibrosis patients with cystic fibrosis, whatever the case may be, I want to know what's the current resources that I can connect them with, because I know that that's going to help them. If I can help connect some of those dots for them, not only when they're in, I have the duty to perform in the institution, but when they're discharged and they go home. I want that for that patient so that I can see them with optimal outcomes. Attend equipment in services, whatever you can to stay sharp. Don't use equipment that you're not familiar with, number one. But if they offer training, you better get yourself there. Don't say, oh, I don't know how to use it, and they've just offered 10 in-services for it, and you just didn't get yourself there. See the difference with that? Know how to invoke the chain of command in your facility. Don't hesitate to do so when needed. Similar, when you're in nursing school, you know to go to the instructor, you go to the course coordinator, you go to the level coordinator, the director, then on up assistant dean. You know there's a chain of command. Same way when you're in an institution. You want to talk to the person directly if you have a concern, then go to the manager, go to the charge nurse, whatever the case may be, then to the unit manager, and climb up the proper ladder. Same way as if it's patient care. If you're not getting the care that needs to be done for that patient, then maybe you need to step over that PA or that med student or whatever the case may be, get to the attending. If you don't get the response needed for that patient, then you need to step over them as well, but you're doing so in a professional, in an appropriate manner when doing so. Carry personal malpractice insurance, protect the license that you've worked so hard for. Again, when you're in an interview, ask what coverage, how do you protect the nurses that work within this institution? Are they underneath your overarching litigation coverage? Is there coverage for anything that is within appropriate standard of care? Typically they will say yes. In addition to that, I recommend that you get another policy, and it's not very expensive. If you want to talk about this, reach out to me and I can give you some options. It's not very expensive, but incredible peace of mind. So I would encourage you to look into that as you enter in. Nurse Practice Acts, I just have listed those out. Oklahoma Nurse Practice Acts, they also define the scope of practice. What's different for a LPN versus an RN versus a nurse practitioner, a DMP? What's the difference if you have your PhD? We've mentioned that. This is all under Nurse Practice Acts. You can see Oklahoma Board of Nursing is helping to define exactly what that is, and it changes with time. Our scope of nursing is getting broader. We're doing more things. We're having a greater impact. So as the lines kind of broaden, we need to be aware of that so we make sure we're still within our scope of practice. And I believe There's nurse as an independent contractor. That's also as a travel nurse. If you look to do that, reach out to me and I can help you with that information as well. Interstate Compact Act. This is now where if you hold a state licensure in Oklahoma, then you can also practice in Texas as well, depending on where that you plan. This is important also for traveling nurses because you want to your home state. So if that's Oklahoma, you want to be registered in Oklahoma, but then you also need to look at those laws and how they apply where you're wanting to go. If you're wanting to go out for 2 months and work in California and then come back, that may look different as opposed to if I'm moving to Texas. So depending on what those are, you be aware of that. And describing the duty to perform, we've already went through. This is kind of, these next few slides are just going to kind of reiterate what we've already talked about. And grounds for disciplinary action. Why is the question of intent important in discussion? Intent. Was there an intent for what you did, or was it truly an accident and you stepped out and there was a breach of care? Were you within the scope of practice? Were you doing what a reasonable, prudent nurse would have done in the same situation? Or was there intent to harm? Or was there intent to steal? Whatever the case may be. Disciplinary actions, you can look on there and see what those would be, and those are obviously very case specific. Due process, idea that law and legal proceedings must be fair, and there will be a due process. They cannot slap you in litigation without the due process falling out, and you'll hopefully have trust and faith in that process. Statute of limitation, there's time to discover the rule, and the time frame for this is generally 2 years. And again, I believe that